Hey y'all, this is Billy, the Permaculture Pimp Daddy.
And this is William, the pasture-raised pimp.
And today we're going to discuss the problems with permaculture. Alright, so it's a gloomy day out today, and it seems like a lot of these front porch videos we do on days where there's inclement weather or, you know, it's at the end of the day when things are done, but this is a video that is long in the making. So right off the bat, we want to discuss the definition of the word permaculture. Now, this can be a contentious thing for a number of people out there. In fact, a number of the things we're going to discuss today are likely going to be contentious, but if you think we're people that run away from controversy, just watch some of our previous videos. So, with that said, we're going to talk about, first of all, the definition of the word. Now, from where I'm standing, I have never, ever heard, even from the designer's manual, a concise and simple, dare I say it, an elegant definition for the word, and I'm not sure it's even possible, because it encompasses so much. And in fact, every time I've given this definition to somebody, or at least a textbook version of it, or the most concise version of it I can think of, no matter whom I'm telling, it doesn't matter who the definition I'm telling it to, and it doesn't even matter the intelligence of that person. They kind of glaze out halfway into the definition of it because it encompasses so much. So I'm not sure that there's even...
Or if somebody asks what you do and you say a permaculture designer, and they ask what permaculture is, and then you give them the definition, the textbook definition, and then they're like, okay, so what is permaculture?
Right, exactly. I don't know how many times over and over and over again where you get this, there is not an elegant definition to it, and which in videos past, you know, we've kind of avoided it altogether. In fact, I said as much in some of the earliest videos where I said, okay, instead of worrying about the definition, let's talk about, you know, we've never discussed the prime directive of permaculture, but what we did go to are the ethics, which there's problems in there also as I see it. But the definition of permaculture, if somebody out there has one that is simple and elegant, by all means let me know, because I am in fact the Permaculture Pimp Daddy, and I don't have an elegant definition for the word permaculture.
I think the easiest way to describe permaculture is to just show people examples of it, and then they can kind of figure it out themselves.
Well, that's precisely what we've tried to do. We've tried to show that permaculture isn't just one singular thing. Like there was a lady in the past where we were discussing design, and she would say, well, let's put the permaculture over there. It's not the way it works, at least not with us. It is encompassing of everything around you if you can possibly make that happen. Or there are pieces, you know, it starts, really permaculture for us starts right on this front porch in the house and everywhere else around you. So there are a number of people out there that choose not to even use the word permaculture. There's a husband and wife team that we follow.
That's not because of the definition.
Well, that's partially,
because of the definition.
Well, you're right, but we can get into that also. But partially the reason is because there isn't a concise definition for the word. So they use things like regenerative agriculture, which is beautiful and it says it all, but it doesn't encompass everything. It doesn't discuss the things in zone 0, in your house, on the front porch. It doesn't really cover those things when you say regenerative agriculture. It covers a lot, but I think people elect to use those terms instead of permaculture because there is a lot of other contentions that exist when you get into that. The next issue for me, and it's a big one, is the third ethic. Now, for those that don't know, there are 3 ethics in permaculture. In fact, let me jump back a little bit further. The prime directive in permaculture, I have 0 problem with. That being that immediately you take ownership of yourself, your family, and the things around you that you can control. Now, there is absolutely, positively nothing at all I found a problem with that. Now, the ethics of permaculture as I take them, first of all, people care, earth care, and the abundance given to the previous 2. But there is debate out there what that third ethic is, and there are even folks that say there ought to be a 4th ethic.
Well, let's the reason there's a debate about it is because it's changed a few times and has been reworded a few times.
Okay, the issue with the third ethic, the way I saw it written initially, was that we set limits to population and resources, right. And then it's also evolved into another camp that says there ought to be fair share. Now, we'll cover each one of those in and of itself. Now, Jeff Lawton, I think, makes a pretty compelling case that you automatically set limits to population when you have all the things you need. And he uses the examples of first world countries where population is generally where it should be, but in third world countries or in places where resources are taxed and starved, that you have populations that seem to run away. You know, people ask, man, how are they having all these kids when they suffer so much? Well, a debate could be made that sex is the only luxury you can afford when you find yourself in pretty bad circumstances. Whatever the case may be, I have a fundamental problem with it when you talk about setting limits to population, because who determines that?
Well, also, is the population being set by a person, or is the population being set as a reaction, as a byproduct
of good management? Right. So that's a big problem for me, because who makes those determinations? When you start talking about those things, you know, I don't need to chronicle all the people in history that have pruned populations. Mao, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot. You know, those are people that used and even bastardized a number of
us.
yeah, America, the United States of amnesia. I mean, the list is long of people that have used these ideas, and some of them bastardized far away from what Thomas Malthus initially meant. But I can understand how those things can so easily be misunderstood.
Or like proper management of this property, you wouldn't have 10 cows out here. You would maybe have 3. So that would be setting limit to a population.
Right, which in at the same time also brings everything into balance. So let's talk about that other camp that discusses fair share. Now, either one of those, whether it's fair share or population pruning, I'm going to have a problem with. Because in the past, we have actually engaged in that part of it, where, you know, people feel like they have ownership of things you have just by virtue of sharing a little bit of DNA. When then you're out there working, trudging it out, even on rainy days like this, things got to get done. Animals need to be fed. They need to be moved. Inclement weather doesn't give you a chance to say, oh, I'm not going to do it today. But there are those out there, when harvest time comes around, feel as if they share a piece of that.
Or won't even participate in harvesting.
Right, but still feel like
want a piece.
Right, and still feel like that they deserve their 40 acres and a mule. That ain't going to work for us. In fact, we've tried it, and when you just give this stuff away, a lot of times it's unappreciated, number one, and number two, in time, these same people feel like they have a ownership to it, even though they didn't put anything in on it. So this fair share stuff resembles too close to me some political philosophies also that I disagree with. I'll leave it up to you to figure out what those are. Don't have to look hard to find out. But no, fair share ain't going to work for us. You're not going to come out here and decide, oh, you have too many eggs, or I don't like how you allocate your eggs. Or feel as if, oh, you got this massive harvest, we feel like we should have a piece of that. I'm going to have a problem with that, son, in your libertarian worldview. Do you have a problem with it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the life of me, I can't understand why any farmer or permaculture designer out there would have a political philosophy anything other than, well, I'll leave that for you to fill in the blank.
But the new third ethic, which is return the surplus to the first two ethics, which is people and the environment. Right. Well, we don't have a problem with that. We do that with the eggs for the dogs.
Right, and but there would be also those out there that feel like that's a misallocation of resources. Well, if that's the way you feel about it, grow your own stuff, because that ain't happening here. I mean, we do, now this isn't to say that we just hoard everything and we don't, there is a fair amount of things that we do in terms of giving things away, in terms of our honey, eggs, all these things that we've done in the past. But we will determine how that's divided. Not the state, not the county, not anybody but us.
Which goes back to the prime directive.
Exactly. So we take ownership of that. There are some philosophies out there that I think work well for us and how we allocate our things. Now, if you look in terms of what Milton Friedman suggested, that there are 4 ways to spend money. I would also submit to you that there are 4 ways to allocate your resources. Number 1 is spending other people's money on other people, where neither cost or quality matters. Then there's spending other people's money on yourself. Well, the cost doesn't matter, but quality sure does, because I'm spending it on me. Then there's spending your money on other people, where quality matters less so, but the cost sure does matter because it's coming out of my pocket. And then there's also the final one, and I think the best way to allocate your resources, and that's spending my money or my resources on my interests, where cost and quality both matter. So that's the way we choose to allocate our resources out there, and also taking into account the philosophies of geniuses like Milton Friedman. All right, the next issue in permaculture, strangely enough, is going to be the people. Now, we're not going to win any fans on this, but since when do we care about that sort of thing? We're just going to tell you exactly how we feel about it. Now, it's encouraged to go out there as soon as you do a permaculture design certificate.
Of course. Once you get your certificate, right, after you've done a course.
Right, exactly. It's encouraged that you go out and evangelize this information, and you should to a certain extent, I think. But we have this saying within the trade, within the electrical trade, that the only thing dumber than a first-year apprentice is a first-year journeyman. Now, the other craftsmen out there are probably laughing because you know I'm right. So just think about it. You just sat through a course, got a fire hose worth of information thrown at you, and then you go out there and tell Farmer Brown, who's been doing this for 40 years, that everything he does is wrong. And it may be, but still that person has 30, 20, 10, way more experience in this area than you have. So the notion of going out there after you've had this design certificate and telling somebody, hey, you're doing it all wrong, you need to do it this way, is absurd to me. I personally think that just like any other course, just like I've been through 2 apprenticeships, and at first within that apprenticeship, you learn, you shut your mouth, you pay attention. Even if you do it wrong, you're at least learning what not to do. So I think there ought to be a time spent where you do something of a private apprenticeship, or at least gain this knowledge elsewhere, find out where you may be wrong, and work with people who specialize in such things to where you can at least get some basis of knowledge to be able to tell somebody what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong. Okay, there's another type of person that seems to be, for the most part, they have the loudest voices, and those are the people that seem to be most controversial. You're not going to find, at least in my experience, there aren't a whole lot of us out there that take it in the way that we do. So what sort of person do you think might be a problem within permaculture, son?
The militant vegans who go out there and steal people's livestock. First of all, you didn't pay attention to a permaculture design course if you still think you're a vegan. You can't eat and be a vegan. Our plants eat animals. Our vegetables aren't vegan. So you have these militant vegans going out there stealing people's livestock, probably putting them in a worse environment.
Well, ask yourself, if you're a chicken, would you rather go to kind of seamlessly go to sleep and then go into somebody's freezer, or do you want to be chased by a coyote that wants to take you out and just suffocate you and just tear you apart limb from limb?
Start eating before you die.
Right. So, but you have that camp out there who want to go out there and tell you, oh, you're doing everything wrong. Yeah, the chickens, weren't you told once upon a time that
chicken tractor is slavery for the chicken?
Right, when you're doing the chickenness of the chicken, or the pigness of the pig, or the cowness of the cow, or the sheepness of the sheep, it doesn't matter. We're doing what these animals would naturally do. So yeah, there is a camp out there, this sanctimonious type, that feel like if you're not doing everything in accordance to their worldview, that you're doing it wrong, and they seem to have the loudest voices. And part of what we're doing here is counteracting I think they've lost a lot of converts and people that don't want to claim permaculture. I know of a few.
Well, that's why people claim regenerative agriculture instead of permaculture, because they don't want to be associated with these lunatic vegans. Not all vegans are lunatics. These ones are. The ones we're talking about are.
Right, and they've gotten so many people that claim permaculture right out of the gates because it's what they were doing. They tend not to say it now because these militant people have the loudest voices, and they will go out of their way to destroy your life if you don't fall in accordance to what they're doing. So I know you're out there watching, and if don't start no SH, and there won't be no IT. So, I mean, which is essentially the non-aggression principle in my view. Well, so I mean, if being a vegan is your political or your worldview or even your religion, which it seems to be, because just like every atheist out there, every vegan seems to want to tell you within the first 5 minutes of meeting them that I'm vegan. That's fine if that's what you want to be. But the second you try to impose your lifestyle on me or think I'm going to be a vegan, you got another thing coming.
Or like Immortal Technique said, he's looking like the only hip-hop MF on Schindler's List.
Well, I mean, as you can see, we're not going to adhere to the vegan lifestyle, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. But don't for a minute think that you're going to bully either one of us on this porch or even definitely the woman in the house. If you think you're going to bully me into not claiming I'm a permaculture designer because I'm not a vegan, folks, you got another thing coming. It ain't going to happen, and you're not going to bully us.
In fact, we have a video for you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, stay tuned for that one, for all you militant vegans out there, and do all the things that you feel like you need to do to make your claim. But you know, it goes back to, like I said, the non-aggression principle. Don't start no SH, and there won't be no IT. All right, so the next issue out there is going to be the people that have their pet designs and feel like they should apply them to everything. Now, folks, I'm not acting like I'm high on my horse here, because I was actually one of the people that fell into this early on before I actually got a PDC.
With the hugelkultur.
Right. I thought, because, you know, until I didn't know what I didn't know, I thought that hugelkultur explained I thought it solved a lot of problems.
I think a lot of people get involved with permaculture because they see something along with or involved with hugelkultur or something like that. And then they're thinking, oh, I never have to water again. Right,
and then or swales, you know, you think that, or keyline, or whatever or a particular garden design that you think just is the only way of doing anything. And that's where, whenever you take a PDC, you're going to find it, you're going to hear these words a lot. And at first, it would aggravate me. And the words were, it all depends. And the truth is, it does. Until, you know, that bothered me because I thought they were just deflecting from what the issues were. You didn't know the answer and you say it all depends. When really, I found out that was actually some of the most empowering words that I could hear, because it told me that based on the situation and the environment, that it tells me that I got a lot in the toolbox, and that's what permaculture is. It's just a giant toolbox that gives you so many different options. For example, on this property.
Well, your environment is going to determine what tools you use. You don't pick out your tools and say, hey, I want to use this on this property. Your property will tell you which tools you can use.
Right. For a lot of people out there, having a cob oven makes sense. But we live in a place where it rains practically every other day. So you drop a cob oven out here and it's going to look like, you know, in time, see how that cob oven works out for you in this environment.
Or a solar oven.
Right.
A solar oven wouldn't work here.
Right. But there are methods and techniques, like a swale. In Texas, they made perfect sense in the properties we were on. It made sense in parts of Kansas. Here, it doesn't necessarily make sense because of our slope.
The landscape is too steep.
Right. But in other areas on this property, they absolutely work. Or there are those out there that feel like, oh man, I love keyline, let's just use it everywhere. It doesn't, all these methods and techniques, the cool thing, the wonderful thing about permaculture is that you can say, okay, here's my list of variables. What works? What can I make work?
Or here's what I want, here's what'll work, here's the property, and then let's see how they all work out together.
Right. Another good example of this was the chicken tractors that we made in Texas. They were fantastic for the terrain that we had there. They absolutely, positively will not work in this environment unless you want to see them tumble down the hill. And you can go back and watch those videos. We had to adapt that for the environment that we're in.
Or even swales. So if you're in an arid environment or a dry environment like a desert, you would plant into the ditch part of the swale. Well, if you were to do that here, your trees would just die from rot because it's never going to be out of the water.
That's right. So where you are, so many things determine what method and technique you use. But there are many out there that feel like, oh, this is the answer to everything. Don't be that person. Don't fall into that trap because you're going to save your... I mean, honestly, I was one of them. And as I gotten more, this is why I don't think right out of the gates you should be teaching permaculture until you get a basis of understanding underneath you so you don't make these massive mistakes and then wind up causing yourself tons of trouble. And we're not saying this stuff because we don't have experience in it. We live it and do it every day. We're not weekend warriors. We do it every single day of the week, and we've made massive, monumental mistakes long before we even started the YouTube channel. Would it make sense to put a raised bed in between our trees? Where no, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense for us to move over to a syntropic type design because that is the tool that works. We're taking the right dog to the hunt. Don't always do it, and sometimes we make mistakes, but we adapt.
And that's also in a different zone. That's in zone 2, so that's less management that requires than, that would be a zone 2. So that's less management that requires than our more intensive beds up by the house, which are actually raised beds.
Right, but we take the right dog to the hunt. We try to anyway. But you cannot know this unless you put a little bit of experience under you. It's like Joel Salatin talks about people that make instead of just making his design for a chicken tractor the way it goes right out of the gates, they make all these modifications without being a carpenter, without having any real world experience on this, and then they wind up with a monstrosity that's 3 times heavier than it should be. Okay, the next issue is work and work ethic, and people that they think that they can get this massive yield with almost no work. Is that possible?
Absolutely not.
No, you're going to have to put in some work, folks. I mean, it seems, the thing that doesn't show up on some of the videos that we do, what you don't see are all those hours we put in sweating, planning, all those other things. And perhaps in a way, in the future, we can kind of convey that. But this whole notion of lazy gardening, lazy food forest, lazy whatever, you're going to have to put in some work.
It's not that what we're doing is lazy or even easier. It's just by far more efficient.
Right, but not in the initial stages of it. So it's gonna require some management. That's why it's called management intensive grazing in the way we treat our animals, which is all part of permaculture. It's another part of the toolbox. But there's a notion out there. In fact, you hear it said lazy garden. First of all, I detest the word lazy. Now, as a side note, people may say a lot of things about me or my son or whatever. If it's an honest person, you'll never hear my name thrown in the same sentence as the word lazy. I detest the word because it also gives a misimpression of what it requires, because no matter how lazy the gardening is...
We've never been called lazy.
No, we've been called a lot of things. Remember one of the last properties we've had, there were people saw Michelle and William out there every single day when I was working in town, and they were offering you jobs to come down and say, man, you folks, man, you get after it every single day. So there's a misimpression out there to thinking, I hate the word lazy. I would love to superimpose that word with efficient. It's funny because there's a video out there, I don't know where it is right now, but there are people saying that, yeah, Greg Judy's methods absolutely work, but it's just too much work. Are you kidding me?
Well, it's not that it's too much work. It's just you're going out there, which if you have animals, you should check on them every day. You're just going out there every day and letting them into a new paddock that you set up earlier that week.
Right.
You can set up a bunch of paddocks at once with temporary fencing. It doesn't take long. It's not like you're out there pounding T-posts. You set them all up at once for a week, and then you just let them into new pasture every day.
Right. But it does require a little bit of work. But there are people out there that think that's too much work. Whereas in our own system, let's say on a small scale, I mean, at the most, we move every single fence every day, and at most, it takes maybe 15 minutes. You get better at it as time goes by. It might take a little bit longer, but so what? We go out here, spend 30 minutes doing chores, and then, honestly, that's it. Once the things are in place. But the notion of going out there, yeah, is it lazy to take a bunch of cows and put them in the field and then, you know, come check on them at harvest? Yeah, but you're going to violate that first ethic. You're destroying the ground. You're not improving it by doing that. So those are things we don't do.
And then also, in the long term, you're making it harder for yourself because you're not going to get the same yield the next year, and it's going to keep going down each year.
Right.
And then you're going to get to a point where you have some class 5 disaster because you had a landslide because nothing's growing.
Okay, now it's time we come full circle. So, folks, we hope we didn't do any of this with the spirit of antagonism or to try to upset people. But there are a number of people that reach out to us and say they want the real scoop on this stuff. They don't want to be given any pie in the sky or Pollyanna stuff. They want to be told exactly how these things work and how it goes. But I don't think I could be completely honest with any of you out there if I don't tell you the disagreements, and there are considerably more.
If we introduce permaculture to somebody and then they found that third ethic, and they're like, oh,
say what?
They're into eugenics.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, you didn't tell us about. But with all that said, there's so much more in the pantheon or the continuum of all there is about permaculture. It's just that much we disagree with. But it's important that you know those disagreements, or at least I think it is.
And it's mostly the way people interpret aspects of permaculture that we have issue with, not necessarily the design system itself.
No, not at all. In fact, the great majority of things we do agree with. It's some of the social constructs within it that I think do not lend themselves to progress. And we stated what those are. So folks, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you can absorb what's useful. If not, then, just sayonara. No.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching anyway. Glad you made it to the end. With that said, we hope you found some of this stuff helpful. And so until next time, folks, if there is a next time, this is Billy, the Permaculture Pimp Daddy.
And William, the pasture-raised pimp.
Where PIMP stands for Permaculture is my passion. Because it is, folks. We'll see you next time.